everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name's Steen, and I'm going to tie a few caddis patterns that I like to fish throughout the state, mostly small streams, but I mean, these things are known patterns from all over the world, so give them a shot. First pattern is a Norwegian pattern, just called the Dre, or actually translates to the animal. So I'm going to bring my thread back all the way to the eye of the hook, and I'm going to take a clump of deer hair, try to strip out all the fuzzies. Let's see. I'm gonna find my fancy comb. All right. Go ahead and give this a stack. Tips are all lined. And I'm going to measure this tail kind of about just a little ways past the end of the hook. This is kind of a short, stubby tail. And I'm going to put in a wrap just around the hair first, and then I'm going to put in 2 wraps, and I'm going to cinch it tight. Put in a couple more wraps, and now I'm going to do fairly loose wraps towards the back. And once I've got to this point, then you can cinch it a little bit to get that hair to flare a little bit more. Now you can come back in and give this some firmer wraps to compress that hair, and then a couple wraps underneath will keep it from wanting to roll. And so whatever hackle whatever color you want to make this, let's see. I'm looking for something that's a little short. Now let's try a different hackle. That's a little short. So I'm going to tie the hackle in at the back. I've seen guys start the hackle at the front and wrap it backwards, and then they'll either have a piece of monofilament or the tag end of their thread, which they'll use to trap the hackle. But tie that in and clip off the tag end, and then come back and tie in some dubbing. Let's see, we're going to go with some light olive Beaver Plus dubbing. This is a real light dubbing. It's a mix of beaver fur and antron, so it gives a little sparkle, but it's also good floating, good dry fly dubbing. just a stitch more. Okay. And then we're just going to palmer that hackle forward. Fairly close wraps, but not touching. One more wrap. Go ahead and capture your hackle with a couple wraps, and I put a wrap in front and then go back and put another wrap behind it. Now just lift up all those butts, put in a couple wraps, and put in a whip finish, or two. Okay, clip that. And then pull all these butts forward, and I'm going to give it a pretty good sized head. Now this is more than fishable just like this, but this is a pattern that's intended to ride a little lower in the surface. So I'm going to go ahead and come in and clip everything off the bottom. So now it should ride flush. And it's similar to there's an American pattern called the rough water caddis. It's very similar to that. But so I fished this in a lot of small streams, and the cutthroat seem to love it. So, but most cutthroat are pretty stupid. So. Okay. Oh, that was a so that was a size 12, just a standard dry fly hook. The next pattern, this is another size 12. This is a sedge hook from Arex. So it's kind of like a stimulator hook. And I'm just going to start, for this pattern, it's going to have hackle in the front, so I'm going to use the hook as a gauge for where, because I want these proportions just right, so I'm going to start my thread about a third of the way down the hook. That's just a visual guide for myself. Go ahead and wrap that back. Take my thread a little ways down the bend of the hook. And any dry fly dubbing will work. This is another of that Beaver Plus, which has the Antron in it. If anybody has any questions, just feel free to shout them out. But I'm just going to wrap this up towards that tie-in point, and I'm going to try to taper it as I go along so the body gets a little bigger.
What is that dubbing?
Pardon?
What is the dubbing you're using?
So it's made by Hemingway's, and it's called Beaver Plus, and it's a mixture of beaver hair. I mean, you can. It's a real buggy. Sometimes you get those buggy guard hairs in, but it's a mixture of the beaver hair plus Antron. So the antron gives it a sparkle, and it's going to help it float. Okay, so now that I've gotten up to my tie-in point, I can go ahead and cover up the rest of the hook with thread. And I'm going to take 3 CDC feathers and attempt to line them up. So this is going to be the wing. It's about lined up, and I'm going to measure those out so they go just to the bar, just to the bend of the hook, maybe just a titch further. And when you tie in CDC, it has a tendency to want to roll on you, so I'll tend to position it slightly towards myself, because those first couple wraps of thread, it wants to rotate on top of the hook. So if I've got a couple wraps in, it's still going to want to rotate, but if you put a couple, lift up the butts, and now you can see it's holding and it's not going to rotate. But this is going to, see, I don't know if you can see, that's got that caddis profile. That's what I'm looking for. Go ahead and clip those off. Now we can cover up the rest of the butts. Okay, and this is pretty much completely unnecessary, but I feel like it gives it a little bit of kind of balances the fly from a visual perspective. And so I'm going to tie in a couple of antennae, and these are just hackle stems off the side of a cape that I'm probably never going to use because the feathers are way too big for me, for what I'm doing with them. So I'm going to tie those in with a couple of loose wraps, and then you can try to separate them and position those, maybe. And once you've gotten them about in the right spot, and you can go ahead and cover them up. Clip those off, and these will last you for 3 flies probably, just with a pair. Okay, so then I'm gonna find, even though this is a fairly large size 12 hook, I'm actually gonna really undersize the hackle on this. So I'm looking for something that's probably about an 18. Because these sedge type caddis, they don't have like a real, I want that slender, more of a slender kind of a profile to the fly than a real big hackle at the front. And wrap that forward and clip off your tag end. And then we're just going to wrap this That up to there. You've got to save yourself a little bit of room because I'm going to whip finish under those antennae. That helps prop them up a little bit. Put a wrap under the antenna and then just reposition these, and if they're a little long, give them a trim. So I don't know that this has a name, I just call it a CDC sedge. So dress that with a little like some loon loxa floatant, and that'll float really nicely for you. And that the antenna probably helped. I didn't use like some people use like a mallard flank feather for their antennas, but those things are so fragile. They're just gonna come apart instantly. That's why I liked using those hackle stems for the antenna. But again, those are probably completely superfluous. I don't think fish are drawn to antenna, but anyway. Okay, so for this pattern, this is just your pretty basic elk hair caddis, but your elk hair caddis typically has a dubbing body, and then you hackle the fly over the dubbing. But I've been tying a lot of these over the winter, and there's really no limit as to what you can use for the body. You can use, like a foam works well, like a 1 millimeter razor foam, or holographic tinsel, or pheasant tail. Just experiment. So this one's going to have a peacock, a dyed peacock body. So I'm using that same piece of hackle that I used on the last fly. So this is a size 12 hook, but this is a size about an 18 dubbing. Because once I put the peacock on, I'm adding bulk. So if I were to use a size 12 hackle on this, it's going to be too big. So I like to downsize my hackle by 1 or 2 sizes. And I'm going to tie in my hackle here at the back of the hook instead of at the front. I know the original pattern calls for the hackle to be tied in up near the eye, and then you would wrap it back, and then you counter wrap the hackle with the wire. I try not to put wire on my dry flies whenever possible. But when you're fishing with barbless hooks, they pop out of the fish's mouth so easily. I don't think the hackle really gets disturbed all that much. So this is a Nature Spirit dyed peacock eye. They bleach it and then they dye it. I think this is just brown colored. So I'm going to take two of those fibers, 2 hurls, and I'm not going to tie them in right here because these tips are really quite fragile. So I'm going to give it a good inch or so, tie it in up here. And then you can just rip those off. And then I'm just going to take hold of both of those and wrap them forward. So the peacock's going to add a little bit of a sparkle to the body of the fly. Trap it. And snip off the excess. Now grab a hold of your hackle and just palmer this up the length of the body. And tie it off. It's gonna bug me. Okay. So for the wing, I'm gonna use Nature Spirit Select Cow Elk, and you can get them in these gigantic 6-inch patches. I think a lot of people probably use too much hair when they tie in their elk hair caddis. I had a guy tell me once that you want it to be just sparse enough that it'll allow some light to kind of penetrate through the hair, that the fish can actually see some light through the hair. I think that maybe simulates the natural look of the wings. So I'm going to strip out all the shorts and the fuzzies. It's also a lot easier to tie in a smaller amount of hair than it is a big giant clump of it. Give that a good stack. Okay, and then I'm going to measure this so it's past the body, just about to the bend of the hook. So then I like to put in 1 loose wrap, 2 loose wraps, and then pull it tight towards me, and now put in 3 more tight wraps, and then put in 3 more tight wraps. And at this point I'm going to lift up about 1/3 of those butts and put in another wrap, and do the same thing, and then pull up all the remaining butts. And now we're going to whip finish underneath the butts. So snip off your thread, and then you just have to separate the butts from the tips. And when you tie it in using that technique, you can't even dislodge. So at this point you can manipulate the feathers or the hair. And so that should be sparse enough. It's going to allow some light to penetrate through there. So that's a peacock body elk hair caddis. What's that? No cement. You could put a little bit on your thread when you do those last couple of wraps under the. I try not to use. I don't use a lot of adhesives on my flies. They seem to last. If it falls apart because you caught too many fish, then the fly did its job. So. Okay, so this is a pattern that you could. I just call it a split wing caddis. But it can. I think it would also be a good imitation for a spruce moth. So I'm going to tie this, tie my thread in, and then bring it back up about midway. And I'm going to use some. I'm going to tie in some sparkle emerger yarn for. I don't know if you want to call it a tail or a trailing shuck or whatever. Just wrap this down. Maybe put a wrap underneath. And then I'm going to clip this off fairly short. Go ahead and cover all that stuff up. Okay. Here it is. So I'm going to take a piece of. This is just embroidery floss that you can get at your local fabric shop. It comes in, so each strand has 6 of these smaller strands, so you just peel them off. This is going to be the ribbing. Just work my way back, and then I'm going to use a lighter colored dubbing. This is that Beaver Plus dubbing in cream. And this, I don't know if you can see, but I'm using a bit more dubbing on this than I've used in the other flies. I want kind of especially if this is going to imitate a spruce moth, I'm going to chunk this up a little bit. And then I'm going to counter wrap with this embroidery thread. Go ahead and clip that off. And then you can use a number of materials to split after I tie in the hair, I'm gonna split it down the middle. But I found that a piece of 2mm foam works really well. And I clipped a little V in there just to try to cut down on the bulk. So just tie that in. And get another clump of elk hair. And go through the process of stripping all the fuzzies out. Usually elk hair, if you get a good patch of elk hair, you can strip it all out with your fingers without having to resort to using a comb. Go ahead and give it a stack. And I'm going to tie this in basically the exact same way I did on the elk hair caddis. So with a couple of loose wraps and cinch it down. Lift up a third, lift up a third. Except this time I'm going to pull all those butts forward. And put it in another couple of wraps. So now I'm going to take my thumb and push it down on top of that foam, and I'm just trying to get an even distribution of hair on either side. And once I've got it about right, then I'm going to take the foam and pull it in between. I'm going to take just a couple of wraps with my left hand just to get it in place. Now you can kind of manipulate that hair a little bit. We'll put in some more wraps. And then I'm going to lift everything up. Put in a whip finish. Hair doesn't want to cooperate. Take the foam plus all the butts, try to pull them, and clip them off together to create a head. And now everything is still kind of a mess. And at this point you can look to see whether or not you split that. Sometimes it doesn't always split very evenly. If it's not, just clip off a couple of the hairs that you don't want to even it out. But this is a pattern that I'm actually going to put a little bit of adhesive on. So I'm just going to take some head cement with my bodkin and put it in right in that little groove where I tied down the foam. And if you want, you can even put a drop underneath. So that'll lay fairly, that's going to lay nice and flush on the water. You should be able to skate that across the surface pretty well. But you could also use, instead of foam, you could use CDC to split the wings. I found that the CDC fibers tend to, the hair wants to grab onto the CDC fiber, so sometimes it works, but the foam is easier. Okay, so the last pattern I'm going to do, this is on a, once again, this is on a size 12. I forgot to say that these are size 12. This is a Moonlit MLO 52 dry fly hook. This is going to be a CDC bubble caddis. If you've ever watched Davey McPhail tie, he ties a lot of these patterns. So I'm going to be putting hackle in at the front, so you can see I started my thread about a third of the way back as a visual guide for myself. And then I'm going to bring my thread a little ways up. And then I'm going to take just a couple of 2 CDC fibers, and then you can see that these fibers have a natural curve to them. So when I line those up, I want the curved portion facing down like this. I'm going to gather all the ends, tie those in with a pinch wrap, and then I can pull the ends forward. And hopefully, if everything stayed straight, they still have that curved part facing down. Go ahead and cover everything up. And bring your thread back to the end and take whatever dubbing you'd like. This is the light olive, Beaver Plus.
Is your light olive actually olive, or is it like a weird blue, green, teal color?
What's that?
Is yours actually olive?
I think so.
You gotta look at yours.
I'm colorblind, so it's hard for me to see. You'll have to come and look at the afterwards. So I don't want to put too much because I got to save room for the hackle. So now I'm going to take those 2, you can CDC fibers, and just make a bit of a bubble with them. Once I've got it where I want, then I'm going to tie those in, and hopefully it'll stay on top of the hook. So then I'm going to cover up the butts. And find a appropriate sized hackle. Let's see. So I always tie, can you see that? So I left a little bit more on the bottom. I've got the shiny side facing me. So the intention is that when I start to wrap the hackle, I want the first thing to be contacting the
4 o'clock on the casting pond. Marty Howard doing the snake cast.
The first thing I want to be contacting the shank is a bare stem. If you tie it in right where the hackle fibers start, and if you start to tie it in, they're gonna go all over the place. So I'm gonna leave myself a little bit of a gap. Now I've got a little bit of a ramp that's sloping down towards the eye of the hook, and if I start wrapping it just like this, it's a fairly smooth ramp, so the hackle's going to tend to want to slide down, and I want those wraps to be nice and close and touching. So I'm going to bring my thread back to where I tied in the hackle, and now as I wrap, that's going to keep the thread, that's going to keep the hackle from slipping down the slope, and each wrap is going to advance the thread. Fibers back. Got one straggler I'll take care of afterwards. Go ahead and put in a whip finish. Snip off the thread and then clip off the hackle. And I mean, if you don't want all these wispy things on them, go ahead and trim them off. But it gives it a buggy look. So that's a CDC bubble caddis. And apparently it's 4 o'clock, so that's all I had planned. So thanks for coming out.